fear, mystery, and a life full of struggle. Mary Jane Kelly's story is both tragic and chilling. She went by many names and lived in the dark streets of London, where danger was always near. But who was she really? And how did she become the last known victim of Jack the Ripper? Today, we dive into the heartbreaking story of Mary Jane Kelly. Background. Born around the year 1863, Mary Jane Kelly was also known as Marie Jeanette Kelly, Fair Emma, Ginger, Dark Mary, and Black Mary. She is believed to be the last victim of Jack the Ripper, the unknown killer who murdered at least 5 women in London's Whitechapel and Spitalfields areas between August and November 1888. At the time of her death, she was about 25 years old, working as a prostitute and living in poverty. Who was Mary Jane Kelly? Mary Jane Kelly was born in Limerick, Ireland. Her family later moved to Wales, and at 16, she married a man named Davies. Sadly, he died in a mining accident a few years later. After becoming a widow, she moved to Cardiff, where she got involved in prostitution. She later spent time with a wealthy man in London and even traveled with him to Paris, though she didn't like it there. Around this time, she started using the name Marie Jeanette and lived a more comfortable life for a while, moving to London. Mary Jane Kelly is believed to have arrived in the East End of London sometime around the years 1883 to 1884. Upon her arrival, she initially took up residence in Breezer's Hill, located in the district of St. George in the East. However, as time passed and her circumstances changed, she eventually relocated. By the year 1886, she had moved to Thrall Street in Spitalfields, where she continued to live as she navigated the hardships and challenges of life in Victorian London, meeting Joseph Barnett. By 1886, Kelly was staying at Cooley's lodging house in Thrall Street. On April 8, 1887, she met Joseph Barnett, a 28-year-old fish porter who worked at Billingsgate Market. They had drinks together and decided to meet again the next day. After their second meeting, Kelly and Barnett decided to live together. They first stayed on George Street near Commercial Street, then moved to Little Paternoster Row. However, they were evicted for not paying rent and causing trouble while drunk. After that, they lived on Brick Lane before settling in Miller's Court, Dorset Street, in early 1888. Kelly and Barnett rented a small, simple room at 13 Miller's Court, located behind 26 Dorset Street. The rent was 4 shillings and 6 pence per week. The room was about 12 feet square and contained a bed, 3 tables, and a chair. A picture called The Fisherman's Widow hung above the fireplace, and a small tin bath was stored under the bed. 2 unevenly sized windows faced the yard, where a dustbin and water tap were located. The door opened into a long, narrow passage leading to Dorset Street, which was lit at night by a gas lamp outside. However, Mary Jane Kelly somehow lost her door key, so she locked and unlocked the door by reaching through a broken window next to it. Her German neighbor, Julia Venturney, said Kelly had broken the window while drunk. A man's coat was often placed over the broken pane to act as a curtain and block the cold air. According to her friend Lizzie Albrook, by 1888, Kelly was tired of her life and wanted to return to Ireland to be with her family. Her landlord, John McCarthy, described her as quiet when sober but loud when drunk. She often sang Irish songs but could also become aggressive, which earned her the nickname Dark Mary. In July 1888, Kelly's partner, Joseph Barnett, lost his job as a fish porter, possibly due to theft. With no money, Kelly turned back to prostitution. She also let other prostitutes stay in her room on cold nights, as she didn't have the heart to turn them away. Barnett tolerated this at first, but they argued when she let a woman named Julia stay. On October 30th, 1888, he moved out to New Street, Bishopsgate, but continued visiting Kelly regularly and sometimes gave her money. The murder. Elizabeth Prater, who lived in the room above Kelly, woke up one night when her kitten walked over her neck. Around the same time, Sarah Lewis, who had stayed at 2 Miller's Court that night, also woke up. Both women reported hearing a faint cry of "murder." However, they ignored it since such cries were common in the East End. Lewis described it as only one scream. I took no notice of it. She stayed awake all night and heard the people moving in and out of the courtyard. Around 5:30 a.m., Prater left her room to get a drink at the 10 Bells pub. She didn't see anything suspicious. Discovery of the body. On the morning of the 9 November 1888, Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, Thomas Bowyer, to collect rent. Kelly was 6 weeks behind, owing 29 shillings. Around 10:45 a.m., Bowyer knocked on her door but got no answer. When he tried the handle, he found it locked. Looking through the keyhole, he saw nothing. He then moved aside the cloth covering the broken window and peeked inside. What he saw was horrifying. Kelly's mutilated body lying on the bed. She had likely been dead for several hours. Shocked, Bowyer ran to McCarthy and told him what he had seen. McCarthy checked himself and then sent Bowyer to inform the police. Bowyer rushed to the Commercial Street police station, stammering, "Another one. Jack the Ripper. Awful. McCarthy sent me." Inspector Walter Beck immediately went with Bowyer to Miller's Court, called for a police surgeon, and blocked anyone from entering or leaving. He also sent word to Scotland Yard and requested bloodhounds to track the killer. Soon, senior officers, including Superintendent Thomas Arnold and Inspector Frederick Aberline, arrived. By then, word had spread, and over 1,000 people gathered outside, angry and frightened. At 1:30 p.m., police broke into the room. Inside, they found a fire in the grate, which had been burning so hot that it melted metal on a kettle. Investigators believed the killer had thrown Kelly's clothes into the fire to create light, as the only other light source was a small candle she had bought 2 days earlier. Identification and post-mortem. After 2 crime scene photos were taken, Kelly's body was moved to the Shoreditch mortuary. Her former partner, Joseph Barnett, identified her but could only recognize her by her ear and eyes. Her landlord, John McCarthy, also confirmed her identity. Kelly's mutilation was the worst among all the Whitechapel victims. The killer had more time since he was inside a private room instead of the street. The autopsy took 2.5 hours. Doctors Thomas Bond and George Bagster Phillips examined her body. They estimated that she had been dead for about 12 hours. Phillips believed the brutal mutilations took 2 hours to complete. Rigor mortis was set during the examination and investigation. Kelly had a small cut on her right thumb and several scratches on her hand. Inside her chest, the right lung was damaged and partly torn away, while the left lung had some old scars. Her heart was missing. In her stomach, doctors found partially digested fish and potatoes. Dr. Phillips believed Kelly was killed by a deep cut to the throat, with the mutilations happening afterward. Dr. Bond estimated the murder weapon was a knife about 1 inch wide and at least 6 inches long. However, he did not think the killer had medical knowledge or any experience as a butcher. Police searched nearby houses and questioned locals. A woman named Caroline Maxwell claimed to have seen Kelly alive at 8:30 a.m., and a tailor, Maurice Lewis, said he saw her at 10 a.m. in a pub. However, their claims were dismissed since they didn't match the estimated time of death, and no one else backed up their stories. On November 10th, Dr. Bond linked Kelly's murder to 4 other Whitechapel killings. He described the killer as a loner with violent urges. That same day, Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren offered a pardon to anyone who helped catch the murderer except the killer himself. Despite this, no one was ever arrested for the crimes. George Hutchinson claims, on the night of November 8, 1888, Mary Jane Kelly was seen with a man by her neighbor, George Hutchinson, who later became a witness in the Jack the Ripper case. Hutchinson's statement. On November 12th, Hutchinson went to the police and reported seeing a suspicious man with Kelly shortly before her murder. He described the man with extraordinary detail, even noting the color of his eyelashes, despite the encounter happening in the early hours of the morning. Hutchinson claimed he overheard part of their conversation outside 13 Miller's Court. Kelly mentioned losing her handkerchief, and the man gave her a red one. She then said, "All right, my dear, come along. You will be comfortable." The two entered her home together, and Hutchinson followed them briefly. He waited outside until about 2:45 a.m., but never saw them again. Detective Frederick Aberline initially believed Hutchinson's story and even had him search for the man with the police. However, the suspect was never found. Strangely, Hutchinson's name later vanished from police records, leaving uncertainty about whether his story was dismissed or taken seriously. Doubts about Hutchinson. Some detectives later questioned Hutchinson's account. Walter Dew, a police officer at the time, suggested Hutchinson may have mistaken the date and seen the man on a different day. Another officer, Robert Anderson, stated that the only reliable witness was a Jewish man who had seen a previous victim with the killer, implying Hutchinson was not a credible witness. In modern times, some researchers suspect Hutchinson himself may have been Jack the Ripper, deliberately misleading the police. Others believe he was simply an attention seeker who made up the story to sell to newspapers. Whatever the truth, George Hutchinson remains one of the most debated figures in the Jack the Ripper mystery. Other witnesses. A laundress named Sarah Lewis later reported seeing 2 or 3 people near the Britannia pub around 2:30 a.m. She noticed a well-dressed young man with a dark mustache talking to a woman, both appearing drunk. A poorly dressed woman without a hat stood nearby. Across from Miller's Court, Lewis saw a short, stocky man standing at the entrance while watching the doorway. As she walked past, she also saw a man with a very drunk woman further inside the courtyard. She was certain of the time because she heard the Spitalfields church clock chime. Another neighbor, Mary Ann Cox, left her room shortly after 1 a.m. and returned around 3 a.m. She did not hear any sounds or see any light from Kelly's room. However, she thought she heard someone leaving the building around 5:45 a.m. Joseph Barnett as a suspect. Detective Frederick Aberline questioned Kelly's former partner, Joseph Barnett, for 4 hours and checked his clothes for blood. He was later cleared of any suspicion. Years later, some writers suggested Barnett killed Kelly out of jealousy, possibly because she rejected him. Some even believed he committed the earlier murders to scare her off the streets. Others think he only killed Kelly but mutilated her body to make it look like a Ripper murder. Since Kelly's clothes were neatly folded, it's believed she willingly got into bed, suggesting she either knew her killer or thought he was a client. Some people suspected Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, or her former boyfriend, Joseph Fleming, of being the killer. The locked door mystery. After Kelly's murder, her door was found locked. This means the killer either had a key or knew how to reach through the broken window to lock and unlock it. The murderer may have seen Kelly using this trick before and used it to escape unnoticed. Mary Jane Kelly was buried on Monday, November 19, 1888 at 2 p.m. She was laid to rest in St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone. Reverend Father Columbon led the funeral. Since no family members could be found, her former partner, Joseph Barnett, and her landlord, John McCarthy, made sure she was buried according to her religious traditions. End of the murders and investigation. After Kelly's brutal murder, no similar crimes were reported for more than 6 months. As a result, the police gradually scaled down their investigation, and public interest in the case began to wane. Most historians and experts believe that Mary Jane Kelly was the final victim of Jack the Ripper. Various theories have emerged over the years regarding the fate of the infamous killer. Some suggest he may have died, been arrested for an unrelated crime, been committed to a mental institution, or even fled the country. Despite extensive speculation and countless investigations, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of history's greatest unresolved mysteries, ensuring that the case continues to captivate and intrigue people to this day. And so, the horror of Jack the Ripper lives on, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows of human history. Despite everyone's best efforts, the truth behind his identity and fate remains a mystery, leaving people to ponder the what-ifs and maybes of this chilling case.